The First Anglo-Afghan War, also known as Auckland's Folly, was fought between British India and Afghanistan from 1839 to 1842. It was one of the first major conflicts during the Great Game, the 19th century competition for power and influence in Central Asia between the United Kingdom and Russia, and also marked one of the worst setbacks inflicted on British power in the region after the consolidation of British Raj by the East India Company. In the 1830s, the British were firmly entrenched in India. But by 1837, the British feared a Russian invasion of India through the Khyber and Bolan passes as the Russian Empire had expanded towards the British Dominion of India. The British invaded Afghanistan on the basis of intelligence about a non-existent threat. Information about a single Russian envoy to Kabul was manipulated to create a scare about a phantom Russian invasion. The British sent an envoy to Kabul to form an alliance with Afghanistan's Emir, Dost Muhammad, against Russia. The Emir was in favor of an alliance but wanted British help in recapturing Peshawar, which the Sikh Empire had captured in 1834. The British refused to help. Dost Muhammad then started negotiating with the Russians, who had also sent an envoy to Kabul. This led the Governor-General of India, Lord Auckland, to conclude that Dost Muhammad was anti-British. British fears of a Russian invasion of India took one step closer to becoming a reality when negotiations between the Afghans and Russians broke down in 1838. This led Persian troops along with their Russian allies to attack the Afghan city of Herat in western Afghanistan in an attempt to annex it. Russia, wanting to increase its presence in South and Central Asia, had formed an alliance with Persia, which had territorial disputes with Afghanistan, as Herat had been part of the Persian Empire and only in 1750 had it been taken over by Afghanistan. Lord Auckland's plan was to drive away the besiegers and install a ruler in Afghanistan who was pro-British in place of the current Afghan ruler. The British chose Shua Shadrani to be the new leader of Afghanistan. To justify his plan, Lord Auckland issued the similar manifesto in October 1838, setting forth the necessary reasons for British intervention in Afghanistan. The manifesto stated that in order to ensure the welfare of India, the British must have a trustworthy ally on India's western frontier. The official British position that their troops were merely supporting Chashua's small army in retaking what was once his throne was generally seen, at the time, as well as now, as pretext for incorporating Afghanistan into the British Empire. Although the similar manifesto stated that British troops would be withdrawn as soon as Shua was installed in Kabul, Shua's rule depended entirely on British arms to suppress rebellion and on British funds to buy the support of tribal chiefs. The British denied that they were invading Afghanistan, instead claiming they were merely supporting its legitimate Shua government against foreign interference and factious opposition. However, with Persia ruled by a pro-Russian, it may well have been the case that Britain was trying to install a pro-British leader in Afghanistan to prevent Russia from becoming the dominant power and threatening the northwest frontier. An army of 21,000 British and Indian troops under the command of Sir John Keane, subsequently replaced by Sir Willoughby Cotton and then by William Elphinstone, set out from Punjab in December 1838. With them was William Hay Macnaghten, the former Chief Secretary of the Calcutta government, who had been selected as Britain's chief representative to Kabul. By late March 1839, the British forces had reached Quetta, crossed the Bolan Pass and begun their march to Kabul. They advanced through rough terrain, crossed deserts and 4,000-meter-high mountain passes, but made good progress and took Kandahar on April 25, 1839. On July 22, in a surprise attack, they captured the until then impregnable fortress of Ghazni, which overlooks a plain leading eastward into the northwest frontier province. An Afghan had betrayed his sovereign, and the British troops managed to blow up one city gate and marched into the city in a euphoric mood. In taking this fortress, they suffered 200 men killed and wounded, while the Afghans lost nearly 500 men. 1,600 Afghans were taken prisoner with an unknown number wounded. The fact that Ghazni was well supplied eased the further advance considerably. Following this, the British achieved a decisive victory over Dost Muhammad's troops, led by one of his sons. Dost Muhammad fled with his loyal followers across the passes to Bamiyan, and ultimately to Bukhara. In August 1839, after almost 30 years, Shua was again enthroned in Kabul. On November 13, 1839, while en route to India, the Bombay column was attacked. As a form of reprisal, the Baluchi tribal fortress of Kalat, from where Baluchi tribes had harassed and attacked British convoys during the move towards the Bolan Pass. The majority of the British troops returned to India, only 8,000 remained in Afghanistan, but it soon became clear that Shua's rule could only be maintained with the presence of a greater number of British forces. The Afghans resented the British presence and the rule of Shah Shua. As the occupation dragged on, William Hay McNiggton allowed his soldiers to bring their families to Afghanistan in order to improve morale. This further infuriated the Afghans, as it appeared the British were setting up a permanent occupation. Dost Muhammad unsuccessfully attacked the British and their Afghan protégé, and subsequently surrendered and was exiled to India in late 1840. By this time, the British had vacated the fortress of Balakhisar and relocated to a cantonment built to the northeast of Kabul. The chosen location was indefensible, being low and swampy with hills on every side. To make matters worse, the cantonment was too large in relation to the number of troops camped in it and had a defensive perimeter almost 2 miles wide. In addition, the stores and supplies were in a separate fort, 300 yards from the main cantonment. By October 1841, disaffected Afghan tribes were flocking to support Dost Muhammad's son, Muhammad Akbar Khan, in Bamiyan. In November 1841, a senior British officer, Sir Alexander Secundus, and his aides were killed by a mob in Kabul. The British forces took no action in response to the incident, which encouraged further revolt. The British situation soon deteriorated when Afghans stormed the poorly defended supply fort inside Kabul on November 9. In the following weeks, the British commanders tried to negotiate with Akbar Khan. McNiggton secretly offered to make Akbar Afghanistan's vizier in exchange for allowing the British to stay, while simultaneously disbursing large sums of money to have him assassinated, proceedings that were reported to Akbar Khan. A meeting for direct negotiations between McNiggton and Akbar was held near the cantonment on 23 December, but McNiggton and the 3 officers accompanying him were seized and slain by Akbar Khan. McNiggton's body was dragged through the streets of Kabul and displayed in the bazaar. Elphinstone had partly lost command of his troops already and his authority was badly damaged. On the 1st of January 1842, following some unusual thinking by Elphinstone, which may have had something to do with the poor defensibility of the cantonment, an agreement was reached that provided for the safe exodus of the British garrison and its dependents from Afghanistan. "5 days later, the withdrawal began. The departing British contingent numbered around 16,000, of which about 4,500 were military personnel, and over 12,000 were civilian camp followers. The military force consisted mostly of Indian units and one British battalion, 44th Regiment of Foot. They were attacked by Ghilzai warriors as they struggled through the snowbound passes. The evacuees were killed in huge numbers as they made their way down the 30 miles, 48 of treacherous gorges and passes lying along the Kabul River between Kabul and Gandamak, and were massacred at the Gandamak Pass before a survivor reached the besieged garrison at Jalalabad. The force had been reduced to fewer than 40 men by a withdrawal from Kabul that had become, towards the end, a running battle through 2 feet of snow. The ground was frozen, the men had no shelter and had little food for weeks. Of the remaining weapons possessed by the survivors, there were approximately a dozen working muskets, the officers' pistols and a few swords. The remnants of the 44th were all killed except Captain James Souter, Sergeant Fair and 7 soldiers who were taken prisoner. The only Briton to reach Jalalabad was Dr. William Bryden. Along with the attacks on the garrison at Kabul, Afghan forces also beleaguered the other British contingents in Afghanistan. These were at Kandahar, where the largest British force in the country had been stationed, Jalalabad, held by a force which had been sent from Kabul in October 1841 as the first stage of a planned withdrawal, and Ghazni. Ghazni was stormed, but the other garrisons held out until relief forces arrived from India, in spring 1842. Akbar Khan was heavily defeated near Jalalabad and plans were laid for the recapture of Kabul and the restoration of British hegemony. However, following a change of government in Britain, Lord Auckland had suffered a stroke and had been replaced as Governor-General by Lord Ellenborough, who was under instructions to bring the war to an end. He ordered the forces at Kandahar and Jalalabad to leave Afghanistan after inflicting reprisals and securing the release of prisoners taken during the retreat from Kabul. In August 1842, General Nott advanced from Kandahar, pillaging the countryside and seizing Ghazni, whose fortifications he demolished. Meanwhile, General Pollock, advancing through the Khyber Pass from Jalalabad, inflicted a further crushing defeat on Akbar Khan. The combined British forces defeated all opposition before taking Kabul in September. A month later, having rescued the prisoners and demolished the city's main bazaar as an act of retaliation for the destruction of Elphinstone's column, they withdrew from Afghanistan through the Khyber Pass. Dost Muhammad was released, re-established his authority in Kabul, and died on June 9, 1863. In the 3 decades after the First Anglo Afghan War, the Russians advanced steadily southward towards Afghanistan. In 1842, the Russian border was on the other side of the Aral Sea from Afghanistan, but 5 years later the Tsar's outposts had moved to the lower reaches of the Amu Darya. By 1865, Tashkent had been formally annexed, as was Samarkand 3 years later. A peace treaty in 1873 with Emir Alim Khan of the Mangit dynasty, the ruler of Bukhara, virtually stripped him of his independence. Russian control then extended as far as the northern bank of the Amu Darya. In 1878, the British invaded again, beginning the Second Anglo-Afghan War. Lady Butler's famous painting of Dr. William Brydon, initially thought to be the sole survivor, gasping his way to the British outpost in Jalalabad, helped make Afghanistan's reputation as a graveyard for foreign armies and became one of the great epics of empire. In 1843, the British Army chaplain Reverend G.H. Gleig wrote a memoir of the disastrous First Anglo-Afghan War, of which he was one of the very few survivors. He wrote that it was
a war begun for no wise purpose, carried on with a strange mixture of rashness and timidity, brought to a close after suffering and disaster, without much glory attached either to the government which directed, or the great body of troops which waged it. Not one benefit, political or military, was acquired with this war. Our eventual evacuation of the country resembled the retreat of an army defeated.
The First Anglo-Afghan War, Auckland's Folly, from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, was made possible by Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia that anyone can edit. Ivona Recordings, let the world hear what you really have to say. Subtitle Edit, version 3.1. Windows Live Movie Maker, movie making magic.